The Graphic Histories Podcast.
I got bit by a radioactive bug. I tried an experimental drug. Went up for a stroll on a gamma testing range. I found an enchanted hurricane. I made a serum that made me small. I modified the serum so it would make me tall. Radioactive isotope in my eyes. Dying alien helped me accessorize. I gained the proportion and strength of a spider. Now I'm invincible and I can fly. I lost my sight, my other senses were heightened. I'm gonna put on my pajamas and go fight crime.
Hey, it's that time again, and that time, of course, is for the Graphic Histories Podcast. My name is André, your host. Big thanks to Uka the Mock for our theme song, Superpowers. And big thanks to you, gentle listener, for tuning in once again to another fun-filled, action-packed episode. And I say action-packed because in this episode we discuss action in comics, specifically punching and kicking and action sequences, and a little bit of how wrestling affects that, which is a lot of fun. But I'm not going to give too much away, just give you a little taste of what is to come. That is to come, of course, because I'm speaking in this episode with Jim Rugg, a graphic designer originally, turned to cartoonist, done some indie books, most notably Afrodisiac and Plain Janes for DC, and later on self-published. Most notably, as of late, he's been working on a treasury edition of his book, The Incredible Hulk Grand Design, in which he goes through the history. It's kind of a story that goes through the history of the Hulk's first 300 issues, in a very interesting, sprawling story that plays with a character that we all know and love, and the continuity that's been established over many, many decades. Jim's a super cool guy, real fondness for the character of the Hulk, and comics in general, as well as B-movies, sci-fi, all that sort of stuff, and wrestling, which is something we connected with. He does mention in this in our interview that if there was a Venn diagram for the two of us, it would be almost overlapping, and that is true. We do have a lot of similar interests. We're about the same age. Very cool guy. I can't thank him enough for being on the show. Oh yeah, and he does an amazing podcast called Comics Kayfabe with Ed Pisker, in which they discuss comics and have other comic people on the show to discuss comics as well. Very, very cool. If you're a comic fan, if you listen to this, you must be. So make sure to tune into that. Give it a like and a subscribe as well. As far as things going on with me this week, nothing too exciting. Busy as the summer often comes. We are in what we call the dog days of summer. Here in Nova Scotia, it is probably the hottest week on record as far as this year goes. And it's been a scorcher. Been some boiling, spicy days, as I like to call them, because spicy, indicates heat, but it doesn't sound as bad as just complaining about the hot as everyone else does. This week I have some things to catch up on, mostly with work, but also getting this episode in. I'm recording this a few weeks before it actually airs, just because I just spoke with Jim, and I wanted to get this in the hopper so that I can be off on my vacation, which comes in a couple weeks, and not have to worry about it. So if there's any world-shattering events that happen between now and then, the crab people finally emerge from their subterranean depths and enslave the human race. And if I don't talk about it in this particular intro, it's because I didn't know about it yet. But hopefully future André is being welcomed by his new crab overlords and enthusiastically helping them in their plans for world domination. This week coming up, I'm hanging out with some of my theater group friends and also attending an outdoor screening of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is being shown at Propeller Arcade in Halifax. On the side of the building outside, you just bring some lawn chairs, you hang out, and you watch Texas Chainsaw Massacre. They have some local vendors there. The record store is going to be selling soundtracks there. I think there's some food people there. Of course, it's a brewery, so alcohol is being served. And they also have some prizes, old Blu-rays of movies and such. The biggest prize they have is an actual Husqvarna chainsaw, which I actually could use. It's funny because I had a wrestling event there a few weeks ago, which I learned about the screening and got very excited, bought tickets so me and a friend could go. And I was speaking with the owner, and I was telling him, I could actually probably use that chainsaw. And he laughed and said, the last screening they did was of Conan, and they gave out a big replica of Conan's sword. This time it's just a chainsaw, but he said a lot of people are saying they could actually use a chainsaw, so there's some real world utility to this particular prize, and he's kind of enjoying how different that is from the usual sort of fare they give away at these events. So I'm very excited to go watch it. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is indeed one of my favorite, if not, I guess I could say with confidence that it is my favorite horror film. I mean, I like horror movies a lot. I talk about them frequently, usually with guests in the show that are like-minded. But I really do like horror films, and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is one of the first that really showed me what the genre can do. It's not new by any rights. It came out in the 70s, I believe 73 or 74, directed by Tobe Hooper. But it has a real griminess. Like, you watch that movie and you feel dirty. You just feel uneasy the whole time. There's this real feeling of dread the entire time you watch the movie. And it does an amazing job of sort of getting under your skin, for lack of a better term. And making you just kind of sit in the seediness of it. And it's beautiful. It's a really good film. Wonderfully shot. Incredibly creepy, disturbing. It created a very iconic villain in Leatherface. And it's a great film. So, if you're listening to this, it's already past the event and you missed it. But if you haven't seen Texas Chainsaw Massacre and you want to get out there and, see some interesting, innovative, genre-changing horror, Texas Chainsaw Massacre is your ticket. So go watch it. But, as I mentioned, I may be in servitude of the crab people now. At the time of this listening, I should get back to toiling in my crab mines and let you get to the episode. So, Jim is... I had an amazing time talking to Jim. Every once in a while, like, all these interviews have been great. I've never had one I've not enjoyed doing. They're all wonderful, but every once in a while I really click with the person I'm interviewing because it's obvious that we are on a similar wavelength, that we are aligned in our interests and perhaps our personalities. And I think Jim and I were. We had a great talk, great discussion. He's huge into wrestling and a lot of things that I'm into as well. So a lot of things overlapped here in this conversation, and I'm looking forward to you hearing it. So without much further ado, let's get to it. This is my interview with Marvel Comics Incredible Hulk Grand Design creator and Comics Kayfabe co-host, Jim Rugg.
I go through these phases where I end up recording, like doing a ton of Zoom stuff, but I haven't for a little bit. And who knows? I feel like there are updates all the time, and all it takes is being like one update behind to have some issues. But
that's a good point. Yeah, I know it's amazing how we all got super comfortable with Zoom super fast, and then as soon as like things started to open up in our area anyway, it seems like the need for it has kind of fallen away so much. If it wasn't for this, I probably wouldn't use it at all anymore.
Yeah, I hear you.
I was having Zoom fatigue, like
right.
when all your like different groups of friends and family would want to chat, and then it's like, my wife would be like, "Oh, we got to talk to my aunt and uncle this night," and then cousins the next night, and it's like, man, every night, I just don't want to be in Zoom for a while. Can I just have a night where I'm not talking to somebody?
That's funny.
Yeah,
my family is all like Luddites.
Oh yeah.
So there was no family kind of Zoom.
My family is like, my parents were like, my dad barely knows how to operate a remote control for a television, but mom would try to muddle through with her phone with me trying to explain it to her while the phone's sideways and upside down and everything in between. Awesome. So where are you at right now? Where's the home for you?
I'm a little bit north of Pittsburgh.
Ah, okay. Excellent. Is that where you grew up, or is that
I grew up about an hour south of Pittsburgh, so more or less I grew up in this region.
So in the general area, right on?
Southwestern Pennsylvania.
Ah, very nice. It sounds picturesque. I can imagine it in my mind.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
Fair.
Is it hot as balls there too?
We do have hot summers, although today was a mild day. So
I think it's the hottest day. I'm in Nova Scotia.
Really?
Yeah.
We did an event there a couple, like right before lockdown, the fall before lockdown.
Was it the East Coast Comic Expo? Was that the one you were at? The one in Moncton? Oh no, you were at HowCon probably, were you?
Yeah, I think it was that one.
Yeah, I was probably there as well. So I don't know if we crossed paths, but
I really like Nova Scotia. I went up with Ed, and I thought it's a place I would go with my wife. Like, I thought it was a very beautiful spot.
Well, there's an alarming amount, not alarming, because I'm actually very happy to have them come, but there's quite a few comic artists and writers who have relocated here kind of just before or during the pandemic. Like, like Ed Brubaker lives here now. And
really? I had no idea he lived there.
Yeah, he moved here. He was on the show. Like, I think he was my first guest on the show way back when. He lives here. Jed McKay lives here, but he's from PEI originally, but he moved back there. I'm trying to think of some other people like, and I think there's somebody else big I'm missing that's in the area now, but Yeah, quite a few people have kind of made their way out here. Oh, the artist for Steve McNiven lives out here.
Yeah, we ran into Steve when we were there.
Yeah, no, he's super cool. And a few other people have kind of made their way through, but it seems to be like, I think it was Mike Ruth was talking to me about him, and some other folks are looking at moving out this way as well, just because it's, it seems to be, when you're doing your sort of job, you can kind of do it anywhere really, right? And Nova Scotia seems to, well, for Canadians anyway, I don't know how immigrating from the States would be, but it seems like, a slower pace and also a lower cost of living than a lot of the other bigger cities in Canada.
Also, like I said, it was very beautiful, the part that I saw. And I don't know if Ed's coming from LA or somewhere, that might be a really nice, might be even more beautiful in comparison.
Well, I want to say it was from Toronto originally, I think, if I recall the story correctly. But
yeah, it could be.
Yeah. So, so what was growing up like? Were you big into comics from the get-go, or is that something that came a little later?
I was big into drawing, and like video stores showed up whenever I was in elementary school, and that was the greatest thing ever for me. So I grew up in the middle of culturally in the middle of nowhere. It was a very small town that had been in decline for 100 years. And there wasn't a lot there, there wasn't a lot to do. So video stores were awesome. And then I started delivering newspapers when I was 10, and it gave me my own kind of disposable income. And I started buying comics. My parents thought I was too old for comics, which is why I say, get my own income and then start buying it. But there was still a stigma, like from generations before, of like comic book burnings and comics are bad. That still existed in my family.
Really? Even like the seduction of the innocent stuff that still was hanging around? Wow.
I had an aunt who would tell me stories. She was like the only family member that had some interest in comics, like once my interest showed up. And she said that my grandmother found her stash of comics, mostly Warlord comics, and threw them all away or burnt them, but destroyed them.
Oh no! So, like Mike Grell's Warlord comics?
What's that?
Like the Grell's Warlord comics?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah, she was about 10 or 15. She was the youngest of my aunt and uncles, but she was still 10 or 15 years older than me. So.
Oh wow!
Would have, I guess, maybe been in the 70s, early 80s, somewhere.
Still, around. That's amazing. It's like Grell is like the thing that's going to damn you to hell.
I don't know if my grandmother was reading the comics to see like if they were okay. I think it was more of just like comic books bad.
Yeah, it's hard to believe, even in modern society, how they've sort of integrated their way into everything now. With Marvel
it's incredible.
Films, and like how only 50 years ago they were like the seduction of the innocent, like. Burn them in the streets. They're going to turn your kids into monsters, like right up there with Reefer Madness and all those other propaganda things. It's kind of insane.
It is. And I mean, you don't even have to go back 50 years. Like I went to school in the 90s and I had art teachers all look down their nose at comics. I had a design teacher who loved books and book design. And I showed him Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics, and he had this incredible book collection. So he asked me to get him a copy. Like he recognized this is amazing. But by and large, like my art teachers, high school and college, were just not into comics at all. And that was in the that was the 90s, basically, all the way through. I graduated in 99. So that was still like a thing comics had not overcome. When I started doing shows, when I started making comics and exhibiting, I did SPX in 2000. And I can remember the people coming through, they didn't look like what I thought of as like Pittsburgh Comic-Con regulars. And by that, I mean, like they were all different ages. It was men and women. It was just, like it was so typical that I would see myself at, say, Pittsburgh Comic-Con, right? A 20, 30, 40-year-old guy wandering around. And SPX, it was like this totally different audience. And I'm talking to people as they're coming through, like, what do you do? How do you get into comics? And I remember talking to this lady that was a librarian, school librarian. And she was probably in her 50s, I guess. But she was talking about how like her students are into comics. And so she just wants to see what's available and basically like provide something that students want to read. Oh, that's
awesome.
And I remember leaving that show, like it stuck with me. That was over 20 years ago. And it still made that impression of like, this is different. Like, these are comics are being recognized as worthy of being in the libraries or being in schools or, not something to burn or to knock out a kid's hands or something, but to actually, kind of connect those to students and through schools. And that was a big thing, that's a huge shift. Like if you're of a certain age, and you grew up with that, you just take it for granted. But like when I was a kid, I spent a lot of time in our local library, and the only comics would be like maybe some Harold Foster, like Prince Valiant reprints.
Hal Foster,
weren't the best quality, or Garfield.
Yeah.
There was almost nothing in terms of comics. So that's a big shift. Like
we're probably close in age. I'm 36, so if you graduate 99, I graduated 2003, so it's not too far behind you. But it's funny because I went to my local library recently, and I was looking at because I'm a graphic designer, and I was doing some work for some signs they needed. And their graphic novel selection is huge, like massive, bigger than anything. Like when I was a kid, it was Tintin. That's all I could find at the lilibrary.
Yes.
Were Tintin, but which I loved, and they were fun to read. But there wasn't a lot of branching out. But like I'm looking through there, they have like Durf Backdurf stuff, like Trash. They have like Dom DeLuise's stuff. They have like there's Harvey Pekar. There's all this stuff I would never expect to find in the library. Like Cerebus is there, the whole run of it. They had like, and everything even down to like Ex Machina and stuff that is a DC and Marvel. But it was like amazing to just kind of scope through it and see. And I was speaking to the librarian about how that made me very happy, because I'd recently read that, like, I guess the amount of challenging words for kids, like there's like a name given to them, and in comics there's like 20% or 30% more than in an average children's book. So it actually teaches kids like a broader vocabulary earlier on than a lot of things do. And she was saying how a lot of librarians recognize that and are really pushing it for youth to help them get into reading. So.
Yeah, I've gone to several of like the big ALA conferences here in the States, and it's the footprint of graphic novels on the floor of those are giant. Like librarians are definitely on board of trying to find graphic novels that make sense for their patrons.
So when you found comics, well, number one, I think it's amazing that you're such a movie kid, because I'm a huge movie guy. Like, so what were you? Well, let's get into that first, I guess. What were you watching when you first got to the movie store? What were the movies you were bringing home?
I was watching like B movie action movies.
Those are great.
Video horror movies. So,
oh man, that's right up my alley.
Yeah, like what I would think of as trash culture, and it segs perfectly. I was watching wrestling, and then when I adopt comics, it's like it's one more element of this sort of, when there was a distinction between high and low culture, it was certainly on the low end, the stuff that I was consuming. But I didn't think about that at the time. I was just like, oh, Buddy's got an axe to grind in Slaughterhouse. Like, hook me up. That sounds perfect.
It's amazing how on link we are, because number one, comics, same with me. Number two, last night I just watched 1994's Head of the Family by Charles Band. You ever watch that one? It's it's another one of those like terrible 90s schlocky horror movies. And one of my many occupations is I'm a professional wrestler. So I can,
wow.
Yeah, I know. So like, you're just speaking my childhood to me. I'm like, this is all the same stuff. So
yeah, our Venn diagram's like a circle.
Yeah, that's right. The overlap is just pretty deep. And even your art style even speaks to me a lot, and it's kind of similar to some of the stuff I do as well. But no, that's awesome. So what comics were you reading then? Or like, what were you picking up when you got to that?
Mostly Marvel and DC's, because I did grow. I was in this small town, so it was wherever I could get a ride to like the local newsstand, and it was mostly Marvel DC stuff, and more Marvel than DC. By my choice. Like it was when Liefeld's on New Mutants and then X-Force, and Jim Lee comes to Uncanny X-Men and X-Men, and Todd McFarlane's doing Spider-Man. Like that was the era. So I loved all those artists. I certainly followed artists. One of the first books I got was Wolverine number 10, and it's John Buscema and Bill Sienkiewicz. And right after that, I found How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, which was John Buscema. So like right away, I'm connecting artists and styles.
I have it in the shelf right over there. So yeah.
And I just always collect. Like it was always the first comic I bought. I saw the credits and said, I want to make comics, because it looked like I was drawing wrestlers and like, Jason and Freddy and slasher movie characters. So they already kind of looked like comics. And I saw the name of the credits, the artist or the penciler. And then I saw like John Buscema telling you how to make comics, and then you could look at his comics and see how he's doing it. And I just started following artists. Like pretty early on, I got into Frank Miller. Actually traded a big run of Liefeld New Mutants for like almost a complete Daredevil Frank Miller run.
Oh, that's probably a pretty fair trade. I mean, that is, yeah. I mean, Liefeld is not without his charms, but Frank Miller is definitely one of the goats for that.
I don't regret it at all, and I've rebought most of the Liefeld.
Yeah, I was going to say the values probably would be much better for the Daredevil run too, I'd imagine.
It all works out.
Yeah.
But like I was just following artists from the beginning. Like people often ask me about comic characters and what characters do I like. I don't really like any of them. I don't dislike them either. But it was always just I'm following this artist or that artist that I'm interested in. And,
so you didn't care about the stories at all. Like they didn't interest you. It was mostly just the art.
I would read them, but I'm not going to be the one that defends the stories and the writing in most of the Marvel DC comics of the late 80s and early 90s.
That is 100% fair.
So, my story inspirations may come else, from other places, but definitely the comic art stuff. That's what I was just chasing these artists around.
Excellent. So, yeah, it's funny. Buscema was one of my favorites too growing up. And I feel like I always get him confused because there was him. Is there Sal? And did he have a son that also was a?
I don't know of a son. There's his granddaughter is Stephanie, and she's
Right.
done some comics work, mostly like covers,
Mhm.
and she's a really good painter. But I think she's more on the illustration side than the like the panel to panel comics.
Yeah, I'm blanking on the name, but I'm thinking it was there's another Buscema that used to write for or used to do art a lot of Spider-Man and Hulk. And I don't think it was Sal.
I think that's Sal. Sal had a huge run on Incredible Hulk.
Maybe it is Sal then.
And
Was
then
it on
also
Spider-Man
on
Web?
Web of Spider-Man.
That's it then. Then yeah, he was the guy. Like it's funny. There's like you're right about when you're a kid and the sort of artists that get in your head and the ones that you just like. To me, Mark Bagley was like one of the all-time my favorites. Like because it was like he was doing amazing. Tom Lyle was doing just Spider-Man. I really liked his stuff. Sal Buscema was doing Web, and I can't remember who was doing the other one because there's 4 Spectacular. Oh, no, what's Sal? Sal was on. What anyway? One of the others, but it was they were.
I feel like Alex Saviak was on one of them.
That sounds familiar. I can't. I can picture the art in my head. I just can't think of his name. It was right around the time they did like those lenticular covers for all the Spider-Man books. Like they all had the, he did one of them, and I remember like the Enforcers comic where he had the web armor, number 200 or whatever, the silver armor with the black under thing that was like the big cover. So
I never read Sal's Spider-Man, but going through Hulk, like for Hulk Grand Design, I went through that entire run.
Mm-hmm.
Sal Buscema was the guy who stood out to me. Like after going through and reading all of it, it was like, wow, like when I think of classic Hulk, it's kind of his Hulk that I'm picturing in my head. And he drew Hulk for a long time. So
his action
part of it, but it was a good looking Hulk.
His action was amazing. Like he drew a punch like nobody. Like I think maybe him and Kirby might be on the same level, but like, the wind up, the punch, it was always like this huge whole action shot of a winding punch. And it was always amazing. And like, it really flew off the page and really hammered home with you the sort of the level of that. And that's something that I don't think a lot of other artists could replicate. I think
that's something that is missing from a lot of today's superhero stories is that dynamic quality. I think as cartoonists have gone in a more high definition direction, the dynamic stuff has become something that's harder to pull off. You look at those old comics, Kirby, Buscema, anybody, it's really good at it. And it's really more on a cartoony side, like style wise. There's a lot of shorthand, a lot of things that imply motion. And I don't know if there's a high definition like version of that today. You'll see some people. I think Daniel Warren Johnson does dynamic action really well and does it in a kind of a modern contemporary style, but I don't think everybody has that in their skill set these days.
No, and it used to mean more like one punch could be a whole frame, and that. Ooh, did I lose you?
No, I'm still here.
Oh, okay. One punch could be like an entire, like it could mean so much more than 6 pages of a bunch of like kicks to the face or something that you would see in a lot of modern comics.
Right.
But like
also, there was a lot more fighting in old comics.
It
necessarily doesn't always make sense, but if your main audience is a 7-year-old, I think you get away with a little bit. I don't know, maybe not connecting the narrative dots perfectly.
That's true, and often it would be like they would use it if characters were having a conversation. They have it while fighting. Like that would just be something that would be.
That's true.
That would be a standard way they would go about that, and try to get the dialogue in while they're like kicking each other in the face in a lot of other ridiculous ways.
Hearing you describe that, it kind of makes me long for that kind of storytelling.
That is true. Although kind of sometimes it went really far the other way. When you had like, not to nag on Bendis or anything, but you had like this sort of really deconstructed storytelling where it would just be like pages and pages of talking heads, which
That's
is
what I'm saying. Like I'd rather replace the talking, keep all the talking, but replace the talking heads with them having a fight.
All you got to do is put them in like a danger room or a simulation situation where they're just discussing the bad guy they have to fight while fighting robots or other various things. Amazing. So. You mentioned your folks weren't super happy reading comics that thought you had aged out of that time period. Did you have any brothers and sisters that are also into it, or?
No, I was completely on my own with the comics thing, which is fine. I often say they saved my life because they did give me something very hopeful every week. I was always so excited for New Comic Book Day. I'd be like mowing yards in the summer and stuff, and then like go there just disgusting and gross at the end of the day to see what came out. But like once I found comics, like they were just always there, and it was definitely my own thing. I haven't had a lot of people in my life that were also into comics. It was a small town, so it's not like comics were huge. And then once I started making comics and actually like going to shows, I basically found a bunch of other people that were, like my people. It was interesting because I developed friendships with other comics makers. And I remember one of my friends saying how it's like you know these people your whole life, even though you've just met them. And it was true, because we did grow up reading the same stuff or watching the same stuff or aspiring to be comic book artists. So like you start spending time with these people and it's like, oh yeah, we have a lot in common, even though we just met half an hour ago.
Yeah, I spoke about this with somebody else recently, and it's like an instant community. Like you literally, like you can go to a con, and if you're both standing in line to go see, Stan Lee or I don't know, some other artist or writer that you really like obviously you have a connection because you both like this person enough to stand in line to get something signed by them or to talk to them or meet them. So like you just find your community, and especially like I grew up in a very small town too. You mentioned comics are kind of your outlet, or at least something that you saw in quotes saved your life. Did you find the drudgery of small town living like tough to deal with as a young kid, and that there wasn't a lot? It sounded like they gave you an outlet that you could go work in mowing lawns and something to do something productive and make money to be able to afford your hobby. But
there was a lot of positive stuff because I did always draw, and once I sort of saw like, oh, comics art looks kind of like what I'm drawing, it really helped me in that way. So now I'm drawing something that may go somewhere, might have something I could do.
So even early on, you could recognize
for a living or whatever. So, that was a big part of it. The other thing with living in a small town, and it's not so much like, I don't blame anyone for this. I don't think anybody was like intentionally trying to hold me back. But I always say like, I never met an artist who made their living as an artist until I was in my 20s. I mean, it should have been a unicorn for all I knew, or the Easter Bunny, because it's like, it just doesn't exist. At least I couldn't show you an example of like, here's a comic book artist, that I know that pays the bills and has a nice house or whatever. I just never met that person. That person didn't live in my small town, as far as I know. And so like from my family standpoint, or even from whoever's standpoint in that town, it's a very blue collar place. Like you need to figure out how to pay the mortgage and feed your family. And drawing comics was not, you couldn't point at somebody down the street and be like, oh yeah, Jim draws comics. Like you can do that and buy food. It just seemed unrealistic or fantastic, or certainly beyond what anybody in my town was really had any kind of insight on. So, that's a weird feeling. It was pretty much like, I don't know if anybody actively discouraged me, but it also wasn't like, okay, here's how you do it if you want to try to make a living in art.
I like when you worded it.
Like, here's how you do it if you want to try to make a living in art. Get something to fall back on.
Yeah, that's what everybody, like even as a kid when I was drawing, all the teachers would be like, oh, maybe you could be an animator for Disney. Like everybody's brain first goes to like the biggest thing you could possibly do, and that's where you'll find your money, and anybody who's I'm sure animated for any of those big studios can tell you they don't pay that well comparatively to right. work that that people would assume they're all rich because they're animators. But I like what you said. There's no one particularly to blame. I really, in my mind, I enjoy the iconography of like some preacher or something. The local, church that's like really ragging on comics or like specifically trying to stop you from reading comics just to save your soul, your mortal soul.
I think it was all well intentioned. It was just
they care about
outside, my parents' experience, and why not? I wanted to do something that they weren't interested in. So, it's not like they needed to go research how you become a cartoonist, Mom. Help me out.
And I've talked to enough people like on this podcast, like Ron Sutton and other people like that have been around for quite a while and have worked in the industry, and also like worked for Marvel. And like, back in the day, you would literally just have to like go to a con and befriend somebody that knew who to talk to get your foot in the door anywhere. Like he literally became friends with like, oh my God, Corbin, the horror artist. And then like, and then through him got links to other people, and actually just like as a kid went to the Marvel office in New York when his family was on vacation, like just to find out where it was and just meet somebody. And like, cause even us growing up, like the internet wasn't as what it is now. You couldn't just go on and see other artists or even chat rooms and stuff. That came a little later towards the end of my high school career. But and only people like Warren Ellis and a few others had like active online chat rooms that you could go in and maybe get a little more insight into the indie comics racket and what it takes to get there. But it was quite a hill to get over, because literally it's like art school. And if you know anybody that went to art school, they're usually art teachers or doing something else when you were our age, right? Not comic artists. So what was the next step then? Like, were you in school? You mentioned that your art teachers weren't overly sensitive towards comics in general, or welcoming.
Yeah, I went to college and studied design, graphic design, thinking that because this is the second half of the 90s, and the comics industry was just bottoming out. 96 Marvel declares bankruptcy. I forget what the percentage of like comic shops that closed, all the distributors went away. It really was like, oh, this is over. Like, we're in, this is not a job, and didn't know what to do, and at that point I had found alternative comics. So I would look at like Black Hole or something by Charles Burns, and then I would see like Charles Burns in Entertainment Weekly, like some big illustration by him, and it would look super cool, and it'd be like, okay, this is the path that I want to take now, where I would be like, make a living as a freelance illustrator, and then make my own comics, and sort of one would advertise the other. And because that's the examples I was seeing, the Dan Clowes, the people like this that I was reading their comics, I was also seeing their illustration work, and it was like, okay, that's the model to follow. But in college, I chose graphic design because I thought this is art related and I can get a job with it probably, and it's still art related. And I'm really happy that like my reasoning wasn't the best for choosing that, but in hindsight, it was such a good decision, because on one hand, it's like the other art form that's using words and pictures, essentially for their art. So awesome, great skills for a cartoonist. And then I came out of there and I worked in print for 7 years as a designer. And like, I have notes on my next book, like I do my own design almost every book that I do, which is an incredible, it's really an asset, I think. And so that has served me well, just from self-publishing to working with Marvel, quite frankly, like I'm designing the Hulk Grand Design Treasury Collection book. And
which looks amazing. I'm very excited.
Trying some print stuff that I've never done before, and it all, like, having that background allows me to apply that and be like, I'm going to try to make the coolest book I can make, and if Marvel goes for this production idea or that idea, I'm able to advocate for those things. So I think it's worked out really well, but it's kind of an accident. I didn't plan it that well, but it's just a happy accident that it turned out that way. So that was college, design. Minored in painting because I figured I probably wouldn't paint on my own, but like I'm always going to draw, so get some extra skill here. And I always think I should get back into painting because I enjoyed it, but I don't. Comics are very time consuming.
I can tell for sure. It's funny, and it does, like, even graphic design course I found taught me like digital color. Like, as the comic stuff has moved into a digital world, now a lot of artists I watch at conventions just draw on their tablets. There's not even pencil or paper involved anymore. I don't know if I can get used to that. I feel like I just got a tablet. I feel like I can get used to the inking and the coloring maybe. I don't know if I can get used to the just straight up drawing. I'm going to have to like play with it some more before I really feel comfortable.
I use an iPad, and I do. I really like coloring on it.
Yeah, I think I'm going to love coloring on it.
Part of the reason I think like I'm never going to really get into painting because the color is just so fast. There's no cleanup.
Yeah.
Really powerful. I'm sure there's things you can do on paper on a canvas that you can't do on an iPad, but I don't know if they're worth the extra time, effort, and cost.
There's no undo button.
Even reproduction might get challenging then, like you can do a lot in terms of color. I do a lot of layouts on my iPad.
That's a good idea.
And usually the inking I end up doing, like I'll print out my layouts and I'll ink on traditional paper. But I mean, that's the nice thing too. Like, there's just no one way to do any of this.
Yeah, and someone actually mentioned to me one time, it's something I hadn't thought about as it moves to a more digital way. And that's what I was saying earlier, that with graphic design, it's sort of like it teaches you these things like coloring comics and stuff, that layers and Photoshop and all this stuff that's useful, depending whatever method you color. But some artists mentioned to me that they will do the pencils, and that way they have physical drawings they can sell at conventions and stuff like that. And I never thought about that, but I'm like, that's, I guess, pretty. And also, people like to have original art, and if your book ever goes anywhere, it becomes a big thing. It can be profitable in itself, so that's nice as well. But
absolutely, and I spend so much time staring at a screen. Like, I do relish the time I'm at my drawing table and actually working on paper and traditional media. That's some of the most pleasurable stuff for me. So I want to keep as much of that in my process as I can. And like, one of the nice things with technology is you can reproduce almost anything. So I do want to do a book in color on paper, because now you can capture that really easily. Like, in the past, that could be a very difficult thing technically. you know, if you wanted to paint a comic or something like that, it could be challenging to reproduce. And now it's kind of like, yeah, paint, break out the colored pencils, like have fun, whatever idea you have, because probably you can reproduce it now, you know, at a very high level. So the digital's unlocked some stuff, I think, too, that we can do analog or with wet media or traditional media that would have been hard in the past. So yeah, it's kind of amazing the amount of tools that we have now. And yeah, I'm blown away a lot. Like often I think one of the biggest challenges is like you have this infinite number of choices and you've got to whittle it down to one or two choices if you're going to make a story or a book. And that can be a big challenge, you know, when you have these million ideas, it's like, wow, you can do anything, but you can't do
even
everything.
Just looking at some of the stuff like from whole grain design, like it does sound like, it does look like you've taken a lot of different things like that, like mediums and mixing it and some really interesting and cool looking results.
Yeah, I if I have an idea, I try it. You know, I've been very fortunate, and some of it's because I've self-published, but like that's how I've kind of worked for almost 15, really almost my whole time, is just like, if I have an idea, you go for it. And if you're a self-publisher, it's really, can I make this work in a way I want it to, or that I think looks cool? And I've just always kind of kept that going. So you could go back to like Afrodisiac was a book that I did with Ad House Books. It was my first real color graphic,
which I actually bought when at Strange Adventures in Halifax when it came out. I remember I was very impressed with it. As someone who loves, you know, old 70s exploitation films and blaxploitation, all that sort of fun stuff. In fact, I just got the Shaft Criterion Blu-ray, just showed up at my door yesterday. So it's like seeing that, like, and I just got into like Black Dynamite, that film that they'd made. And I was just like loving it. It's such a great throwback. Was that the first one, or like what was your first indie thing that got out there?
Street Angel.
Street Angel, right? Okay.
Yeah, I did Street Angel for SLG. I made a mini comic and it went really well at shows. So I was like, well, I had to find a publisher and then, you know, make more of these. And SLG was the publisher that I found. They were in favor of it. So like they were publishing Evan Dorkin and Johnny Homicidal Maniac and really a pretty diverse line of comics.
Yeah.
So they published Street Angel, and the last issue of Street Angel is the first appearance of Afrodisiac, where like she teams up with this guy who's an old guy now, and he's like, I used to be a superhero, and it flashes back to his golden age in the 70s. And that's what the Afrodisiac graphic novel came out of. But that book, like once I started like getting color opportunities, again, because of digital, you know, printing just getting cheaper, essentially, and separations being cheaper, that whole process, it became like, oh, an indie creator, you can do a color book. Like that was inconceivable in the 80s or 90s, really. And I had to learn how to do color. And I was doing like, I didn't like the way digital color looked on a lot of books. It looked kind of like plastic, like perfect, you know, all these gradients and digital effects. And so I was looking at a lot of comics from the 70s and trying to figure out, why do I like this, but I don't like the more contemporary style. And so I set out to like recreate that original style and see like, how did this work? And it was, you know, breaking down like coloring on the CMYK plates, the channels, and kind of painstaking, but also a chance to like really go through the process of like, why do comics look this way? And, you know, what can I make them still look this way? And, you know, does it look right now? You know, like there was a lot of just like trying different things. There's probably half a dozen techniques at least to color that book, but mostly just experiments, and, you know, the ones that worked out stuck. And I learned a lot about coloring that way, but I also learned it was another step in production of like, oh yeah, you can take some of these chances. You can scan paper samples and, you know, like fold those in for texture. Or I had like coffee stains, like real coffee stains, you know, on a piece of paper. And it was like, bring that in, you know, what can you do with that? So it was a chance to like really kind of get into the history of coloring for me, and things that I still use today and have used on the Hulk Grand design. Yeah,
I've noticed too a real reverence in your coloring towards the old dot coloring. You know, when you see the dots, which I really love. It almost feels like I'm holding, like every time I pick up someone's indie comic, and if they have the newsprint paper, like there's something that just sparks a wonderful part of my brain that like brings you back to like like even the old Marvel comics when they had that sort of that thick, you know, you'd wrap a fish in a kind of newspaper that they put in the comic. I thought it's a really cool little. I don't know how many places offer it or how easy it is to get, or if it's even cheaper than just regular paper nowadays or gloss paper or whatever. But
it's challenging to print on newsprint today because they used to print off of rolls, and like now very few comics are printed at a high enough volume to print that way. And it's also not considered the best quality, especially if you're doing like a CMYK 4-color comic.
Yeah.
Those web presses just aren't the best if you want good alignment and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So newsprint is not as common as it used to be. But there's a lot of great paper. It doesn't have to be newsprint. It can be like, well, how do I capture that quality that you just described, that it kind of feels this way or makes you think about, comics when you were a kid. And there are other ways to do it. You can get an uncoated paper. You can get something that just kind of feels that way, even if it's not exactly what that thing was. And that's a big part of design for me. Like a book should feel good, in your hands.
And that's a whole other element that I don't think a lot of people take into consideration is the actual physical, the manifestation physically of what you're creating and how that adds to the experience, like with the feel of the paper, the coloring profiles you use, even the cover and all that sort of stuff. But the design, the layout, all that stuff is kind of lends itself to the story. But just the physical properties of it is part of the experience that people mostly overlook now, especially since a lot of things just go digital.
Yeah, I wish there was a little more care in all of the production, but people often say like 90% of anything is crap, and I don't know if you can change that ratio. So it's inevitable, when people do care, whenever, you see these books that are beautiful and they feel right and they look good, they stand out, they stand out as having that kind of special quality. So maybe it's inevitable that, certain books are just going to rise,
Yeah. And it probably lends itself
to design and production in some cases than other publishers. So, I don't know the exact reason, but there are definitely designers that I follow around and, I'll see a really impressive book and look at the credits and, you got to be like, oh, it's Jacob Covey again, or, Chip Kidd did this book or, whoever it is. There are a lot of good designers now, but
I just got Marco Rudi's new book, the Kickstarter he did. You familiar with him? He worked for Marvel for a bit. Oh, he does a lot of mixed media, like a lot of painting mixed with art and stuff in his stuff. He did a Spider-Man series for Marvel Knights years ago, and it was like I can't remember the name of the series. It was just like a Marvel Knight miniseries where Spider-Man was fighting like all of his enemies in the entire book. It was like one big gauntlet, but it was just like this beautiful mixed media art all over it. And he just did a new Kickstarter for a book, RDW, I think he called it, which is beautiful. Like it, and you can really feel the texture of it. And like I think when someone takes enough care to make that the exterior of the book look as good as it does, that you can tell that there's a real reverence for the material itself and the writing and the art. So like the outer package can really indicate, you never say never judge a book by its cover,
right.
But not just the art itself, but just the physical product. If a lot of care has gone into the making of that, you can tell they really care about the book and that you're probably going to have a good experience inside. So after that is Street Angel, Afrodisiac, and then you did the Guild as well with the Felicia Day show, the web series.
Yeah, probably that was around the time of Afrodisiac. I did the Guild. I did a book for Image called One Model Nation.
Mm-hmm. What was the Guild like? Did you have to work with Felicia specifically on that, or did she write?
Yeah, she wrote the script. It was very impressive. I had a run where I did like 3 graphic novels with first-time comic book writers, and Felicia was one of them. But she was great. She's a very good writer, and I don't know how much it was work with an editor before it got to me, but when it got to me, it was in very good shape. So,
good.
Yeah, that was a good experience.
I always find it interesting when writers or artists have to work on, like I've talked to Egg, as he worked on Sons of Anarchy comics, and a few other people that have worked on sort of those. I think he worked on X-Files comic too one time. But the people that have worked on some of these sort of properties and what kind of hoops you have to jump through. I mean, that series was probably like I used to watch it when it came out. So I assume since she was sort of the creator of it, that you had a little leeway to what you could do with those things. But I feel like with some of these big properties, you have to jump through so many hoops, and you can't reference something or talk about something, so setting up something else, like it's probably pretty binding. But as an artist, I guess you just go with what the script gives and it goes off from there.
Yeah, I mean, I had no trouble with the Guild. I don't remember anything being like, oh, we want to draw this differently. I don't remember any problems along those lines. And maybe it is because it was her show. So, like you said, she was the one approving it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And I haven't done much other licensed stuff. So, I'm trying to think. I'm sure I have done some through illustration and things, but I haven't had that problem. I've heard stories about it. We read a Marvel Age that was like a day in the life of the Marvel bullpen. And they were talking about all their licensed comics and how they had to be approved at every stage. So script, pencils, inks, letters, colors. And it's just like, to me, that sounds like a nightmare, but it probably isn't. It's probably just a formality for the most part, at least back then. Like now, you're probably right. There's probably a lot of coordination that has to be considered.
I feel like even just
continuity editors and things.
Yeah, and like even just show producers that have ideas about things that are probably related to film and television more so than to comics, right? Like they're different mediums.
Yeah.
So, obviously they're trying to protect their brand, but they also want to make interesting stories for people. I just always find it funny. Just once in my entire life, I'd like to see like a major character from a big show get killed off in the comic, and it's canon. Like, between season 2 and 3, they kill off like one of the major characters. Are like, oh, Billy's dead now. If you want to find out how to Billy, read comic. They never actually really make any big swings like that. I think the only thing that I ever read that I thought was pretty clever was I think Warren Ellis wrote a combination. It was like Wildcats or Gen 13 or one of those. They met like aliens.
Right.
And they actually killed off some major characters in it, and it stuck. And I thought that was like really ballsy and interesting because they never do that in those spinoffs or anything. Like,
I think it was Stormwatch.
Oh, that's what it was. Yes,
and that was
you're
part
right.
of why he agreed to do it, I think.
Yeah.
I think that seemed real interesting. And then it set up, I guess, The Authority is what came out of that.
Yeah, Mark
but it
Miller's
was, you're right. It had like some real impact, I guess you would say.
Which is something you never see,
stories.
And I haven't seen since. I don't think, which is amazing. So what led to, I guess, the next big thing, of course, coming up is your new edition and the work you did with Hulk Grand Design. So how did that come about?
You know what? I forgot one big step.
Oh.
Right after Street Angel, I did The Plain Janes, which was like maybe the first young adult graphic novel. And that has gone on to be a huge piece for me because we did it through DC Comics and we did 2 volumes. And then it was part of like a whole young adult imprint that didn't really succeed. I think it was maybe ahead of its time a little bit because, of course, now young adult graphic novels are enormous.
Huge. It's like there's a Netflix series already for everyone.
It was Shelley Bond was my editor, and she had spearheaded this line of young adult. It was, like I said, I think it was ahead of its time. But I did it with young adult author Cecil Castellucci, and we did 2 volumes, and it was set in a high school, and we never got to tell like the complete story. So the rights reverted back to us, and right before the pandemic, we did like the collected edition plus a 3rd volume, like all in one big 500-page epic.
Nice.
And that was really fun to go back to because it was high school girls who were like kind of the nerdy table at lunch. And one of the girls that used to be popular becomes like friends with them and is like, you guys are so interesting. Like, why do you feel like outcast? And they start just basically doing adventures that follow their interest. And the main character is an artist, so they're doing like public art and causing trouble in their town whenever things start showing up on the side of buildings. Nobody is sure how to respond to that. So that was a really fun comic, and I was happy that we got to finish and wrap that one up. I guess that was 2018, 2017.
Oh, I'm going to look for that collection. That sounds really cool. I'm totally down for that.
Yeah, it's still available. We did it with Little Brown. So like once the rights came back to us, they're more of a mainstream traditional book publisher, but also now everybody has their own graphic novel line. So that's who we ended up publishing with. So it's easy to find, in any big bookstore, anywhere you can find it. But that one was really fun. And then you mentioned the Hulk Grand Design.
Yeah.
That is what I've been working on lately. Actually sent the book files to Marvel today.
Ooh, awesome. Amazing.
Yeah, it's a very exciting moment.
When does the Treasury Edition due out?
It's due out later this year. I think December. I think it was September and got pushed back because of all the supply chain stuff.
Okay.
But it'll be out in time for Christmas. So anybody listening that's like, I have a Hulk fan in my life, or I'm a Hulk fan.
Oh, I'm a Hulk fan. I'll be getting it. That's for sure.
Yeah, perfect. So it'll be out in time. It's a big oversized edition, like those 1970s Treasury editions.
I love those.
The size. Me too. It's part of why I wanted to do the design because I never get to work on a canvas that size. So I'm really psyched to see it. And I've been working on it, for a while. I'm trying to think when I started. But it was like on and off. I started before the pandemic, and when everybody shut down, they Marvel, told all their freelancers, put your pencils down. Like they closed the offices, and distribution went away for a while. And so I ended up doing a blacklight comic in my downtime called Octobriana in 1976, and crowdfunding it. But then like the Hulk starts up again, so like I was doing like this crowdfunder and back on
while doing the Hulk.
It was like this like start and stop kind of thing for a while.
So how did you get the Hulk book to begin with, though? Did Marvel just reach out at some point, or was that a
Ed Piskor, who I do cartoonist kayfabe with?
Yes, we're going to talk to you about that as well, but we'll get to that.
Did a book called X-Men Grand Design.
Yep.
And he did that first. He had done a hip hop history, and I guess one of the editors at Marvel really liked it and was like, what do you want to do? And so he pitched this idea of like X-Men, but like one big story, you know, that is told in like the first 300 issues. And so that was X-Men Grand Design, and the response was good. You know, the book's awesome. And so then the editors asked, I think, a number of cartoonists to do a pitch for a Grand Design book. Tom Scioli did Fantastic Four, which came out in this beautiful book. And I pitched the Hulk. And so, you know, that's the one that I did. And I don't know if other cartoonists are working on any more or not. Like, I joke that I don't want to be the last Grand Design. Like, I don't want to kill this idea, because I think it's really cool. And one of the great things, like, it was a really good experience for me working with Marvel, but I wasn't sure what to expect. You know, like, do they need to see the script, the pencils, you know, the inks, like each step of the way? Like, how's this going to go? And my editor, Will Moss, early on was like, we understand that your process is different than the way we typically produce comics. And that's kind of part of the Grand Design ideas. One cartoonist is writing and drawing and coloring and lettering, which is very common in like a graphic novel or indie alternative comics, but very different than like a Marvel, DC, even Image, you know, is mostly like there's a team that puts a book together. And so he gave me a lot of freedom from the beginning, and I would turn in pages, you know, I had deadlines, but mostly it was like, you know, looks good, keep going. And it really kind of, as the book went on, became more and more fun, because it was like, oh, I have this kind of weird idea for a page. Let me do this one and send it in. And they didn't say no to anything.
That's really encouraging. I'm so happy to hear that. I always assumed that it would just be, because I've talked to other artists from Marvel. Dave Cutler was on the show recently. He does. He's doing the new Moon Girl X-Men book, and he did the Indigenous Voices series, and the new design for Thunderbird that has brought him back in the issue that kind of introduced him. And you know, it sounds like there's a lot of hoops to jump through, and I guess maybe on those big books, but like with something like that, when you're allowed to just, you're doing your own self-contained story. I mean, obviously it's a real throwback to, you know, 300 issues of Hulk history, which is amazing.
Something too. You know, I don't feel like I did anything outrageous. It definitely is built on the history of Hulk. So it's not like I was bringing in new characters or anything, you know, that they would need to look at and say, okay, hold on, this is too far this way.
They're like, hold on, how can we make this character be in our next movie and make more billions of dollars of it? It's sort of alarming to me, and this is just a side note, that, you know, all of the big storylines from all the new Marvel movies, which I all love greatly, I love the Marvel cinematic stuff, are all mostly from comics from the past 20 years. You know what I mean? Like, you know, you got Gore the God Butcher and Thor, the Winter Soldier, Civil War. It's all these big stories that are all like, you know, Spider-Verse. It's like that all just happened in the last 20-ish years. And there's so much old stuff, like from way back when, that I kind of wish they'd mine more, because there's so much cool stuff from back there that I'd like to see. Yeah,
I can speculate on that a little bit. I have no real insight, but I do think that generation of creators, the you know, like I'll say like the Bendis kind of generation, I think that they came out of, like, film was a huge inspiration for that generation. So that may be, you know, their stories may.
I never thought of it that way.
A little bit because of that.
I never thought of it that way, but you might be right, because like everyone, like most, like usually film enthusiasts overlap with comic enthusiasts somewhat because of, you know, your interest, nerd, fantasy, sci-fi elements, all that sort of stuff. But I never really.
If you're a creator, it's another visual storytelling media, so hard not to be seduced by
a comic. Yeah, and a comic, just to me, like, I'm surprised. Like, it's really taken off now with Netflix and all these other streaming platforms. Like, look at the success of The Boys, or like Sweet Tooth, or all these other comics that are taking off. But it's like a comic is literally like I think, as a producer of these sort of things, a comic is a no-brainer. Like, you literally are handed a book that has everything in it. The story, it's even storyboarded for you if you wanted to, you know, like, it's all right there. And so, like, it's the easiest thing that you could translate into a movie or a television series, assuming that the story lends itself to that medium. But yeah, that, to me, I've always found it, like, now that it's really, really taking off, it's crazy. Like, everything under the sun is getting series. And I think it's just because it's so easy to hand it to a producer and say, like, I can see value in this.
Yeah, I think that's it. I don't know how easy it is to translate.
No, there are a lot that there are many that I don't like.
Easy to pitch. You know, it's certainly a you know, more advanced than your average proposal, or a proposal that's mostly all text. Like, it does make it probably easier for
you can envision
somebody to look at and say, oh yeah, I can see what you're describing here.
Sadly, it falls short a lot. Like, I'm a huge fan of Lock and Key, the graphic novel, but I'm not a fan of the Netflix show at all. I really feel like they missed the mark on that one. But
it's incredible to me that like anytime I do anything that's not comics, I just come like sprinting back to comics because the freedom, like you can just make something.
Yeah.
I don't need anybody I don't have to convince anyone of anything. I don't have to like try to explain an idea to someone else who's then going to, help bring that to life. And I love that part. I think it's the greatest strength of comics as an art form.
That's true. There's a real simplicity to that. That's
I think making movies would be tough.
Oh, 100%. You need money.
A lot of people to work with.
You need investors, you need studios, you need film crews, you need all that stuff.
You have to be able to collaborate.
Yeah.
And, I don't know about other cartoonists, but I know my personality type is certainly more on the micromanaging side of things.
Well, it sounds like
other people is it's not easy.
So you weren't the kid that worked well in groups in high school?
No,
I wasn't either. I was the one who pretty much ended up doing almost everything because I didn't trust anybody to do their part. That's amazing. Well, it sounds good that you fell into the grand design format and that you can have that freedom to do your own thing.
It's another one of the things that I love about grand design is, everybody is different. So if you have some cartoonist who you like or who has something to say with a Marvel character, it'd be nice if there was space where, there are these different models of creativity that are available. And I think from Marvel's standpoint, or DC for that matter, or any, IP rights holder, having like a new voice come in, like you're constantly trying to figure that out. As you mentioned, most of these Marvel movies come from creators of the last 20 years. You sort of need new creative blood to come through your system. So it's kind of cool if grand design does continue to allow cartoonists who are more, one person shops to like, what's your Spider-Man look like? Michel Fife. That's going to plug in grand design. But there's a million great creators like that are making comics in a way that's different than that team.
Yeah.
Is there a place for them to, show us their version of some beloved character?
It seems like a good, as a creator, like as a writer or artist or a combination of both, as it seems the grand design is set up to be. You can play with the history. I feel like, to me, I feel like as a creator in the modern market, you would probably be less hesitant, or you'd be more hesitant to create something new and interesting in a Spider-Man comic, knowing you don't own it. If you're like, I have this great idea for a character, the villain or whatever, like, why would you put it in that book when you could maybe do an indie book somewhere where you control it and then you can make, money off it down the line if it sells something. So I feel like it's got to be a weird tightrope as a creator to walk, because you want to make obviously a very interesting, cool story, but you also may not want to give away your golden goose if it's something that can make you money down the line.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I have no idea what Marvel and DC, what they're like now. They have had different contracts throughout history. I think Deadpool and Liefeld are pretty famous as being a favorable contract with a creator.
Yes.
So I don't know what those contracts are like now, but there's a scenario where that can be a favorable experience to create.
That is true. Yeah. And I hope it becomes that. I've just heard, not horror stories, but just some creators have spoken about like how, I think it was like Jim Starlin and some other people didn't really get much for Thanos being in all these movies. And I think even Brubaker, who didn't create Bucky, but created the Winter Soldier, and all the things that make him cool and unique, not getting a lot out of that. I think Marvel gives kind of a thanks pay, but it's not like a specific contract percentage thing. That's kind of
I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. That Ed Brubaker tweeted that he was paid more to be an extra in that movie than he.
Yes, that's what it was. Yeah,
writing that original comic.
Yeah,
and like I mean, look, I can't speak to Disney's policies on any of this stuff.
Yeah. No, I don't want to get. I don't want to anchor him.
So maybe they're making the right business decisions. But you're right. It would make one hesitant, and you see a lot of creators that go from a Marvel or DC into creator-owned work, and I'm glad they do. That was the big revolution in my life, was like Image and the idea of like, we don't have to work at just Marvel or DC. Like I always said, my dream until I was, I think Image started when I was 14. My dream was to like grow up and draw Wolverine or Spider-Man, and then like once Image happens, it's like my dream is to grow up and create my own book that I own and can do whatever I want. And so I want creators to go make their own stuff and to keep that viable and keep comics viable. I see that as a complaint that people will have about Marvel and DC being stale and not bringing new characters up. And I think that's a bigger conversation, and it's not that simple. But at the same time, like, it is awesome that you have all these creator-owned books and new ideas out there. Like, that's the stuff that I usually pick up if I'm going to read something.
Yeah, I mean, even like Ms. Marvel, who just had the Disney series, she's a fairly new character and speaks to a lot of people and a lot of demographics that comics didn't used to speak to. Young people, Muslim American people, young girls even. Comics weren't really designed for them as long ago as 30 years, really. So it's really cool that stuff like that is getting to the forefront and people are actually taking chances and doing it.
I also look at all this because I know people who are will get very heated on one or the other side of this argument. And in my mind, it's like, they're just not exclusive. Like, I want to live in a world where Marvel and DC are paying people to make comics, but also, like, there's a viable market for you to do your own. If you want to license that stuff, you see a lot of creator-owned stuff that makes its way to movies and games and TV and whatever it is that you want to do. Like
Walking Dead,
it's like, this is the best of all worlds.
Yeah, to me right now it's a magical time. Like, even indie comics that were Image, Walking Dead, for instance, look what that blew up into. Even the Invincible series on Amazon is amazing, and like critically and I think commercially very successful for them. So there's stuff like that. The Boys, there's stuff like that. I love the Preacher TV show. It didn't last as long as I would have liked it to. But it was pretty fantastic. And it didn't feel exactly like the comic, but it was different enough and unique enough that I got a real joy out of it. So, there's a lot of stuff there for that. But anyway, before moving on, I'm going to keep you here all night. So why the Hulk? What was the draw for the Hulk? 'Cause I read an interview that you had recently where you said that was like the superhero you glommed onto originally.
Yeah, I had Hulk stuff whenever I was like 6, like long before I was buying comic books. Long before I knew the Hulk was a comic book,
just like the Green Guy.
I had a cereal bowl with the Hulk busting through a brick wall, and it just looked like a monster. And I'd read on the back his origin, and it was a monster. It was Frankenstein or Godzilla or any of this stuff that I would love to watch. Going back to movies, like Saturdays, I'd have like UHF, black and white monster movies, and horror movies, and so like Hulk just fit in that world. And I didn't know anything about comics. I just thought that's super cool. And then slowly I started to see like, oh, there's a Hulk TV show was in syndication at the time. I think there was a Hulk cartoon probably shortly thereafter, and I started to become aware of him. But that would be a character and one of the few comic book characters where that wasn't based on, I want to draw comics. That was based on, this is cool. Like, what is this? As a little kid. And so if there's nostalgia for any of these characters, Hulk is my number one character for that reason. So, whenever Marvel asked me about like, if there was a grand design that I wanted to do, it was Hulk by a landslide. Like, I'm very fortunate that Tom Scioli didn't pick Hulk first or something. But like, that was the character. Like, if I could do whatever, this project, I say it's like a dream project, because if Marvel came to me and said, you can do whatever you want, Hulk grand design is basically what I would do. So, it just,
wow.
I don't know, man, it was right place, right time. But it was a very fun project for those reasons.
That's awesome. And you're right. The Hulk, to me, I think is part of the draw. I've always been a huge Spider-Man fan, as indicated by this Spider-Man tattoo. But my whole life,
it's the best costume in comics.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny. I was at a con. Darwin Cook used to live here before he passed away, and I was at a con one time where I think it was just Free Comic Book Day, and he was just doing sketches. And you probably can't see it, but I have a sketch of Spider-Man he did on the wall, and I remember him drawing it, saying like, "Oh, God damn it!" He said, "Leave it to Ditko to design a costume that only he could draw," which I thought was really funny. But you're right. It does lend itself to that early, like, he basically is Jekyll and Hyde, Frankenstein, a bunch of those sort of black and white characters wrapped into one. Have you read the Barry Windsor Smith Monster? Is it called Monster?
Yeah, Monster. Yeah, I have.
It's on the top of my read pile. It's next to go, and I know it was like originally a Hulk story that he repurposed into an individual thing.
I would recommend read that whenever you have a stretch of some sunny weather.
Oh, really? Okay. Is it that dark? Is it just like a really dark book?
It's pretty dark.
Well, it's pretty sunny all week here, so this might be the week. I got a hammock out back. I can sit in that and
one of like a couple of thoughts on Hulk. Also, one, I like him because he's a monster, and if you look at like all the superheroes, Marvel, DC, whatever, Hulk really is different than the rest of them because of that monster status. He's not an anti-hero. He's not a villain. like he's truly a unique character sort of in this superhero universe that we live in nowadays.
Yeah, not even like costume or anything. He's just ripped pants, you know. So,
and then the other thing is, like, when I talk about, like, I just followed different artists, and like I went through a Kent Williams phase and a Bill Sienkiewicz, you know, and Mark Silvestri. Hulk is like this character. Like, one of the first memories I had of reading comics was a Marvel Age that had the many faces of the Hulk. They would run like the many faces of different characters, and it'd be like each version, you know, be a different artist version. The Hulk was so different. You know, you'd have like Todd McFarlane with this like giant Cro-Magnon kind of brow. You know, that I can remember that distinctly. We're like looking at those and trying to guess like which artist is which, but also like it's just so different from artist to artist. And so it allowed me to really play with that. And it's, you know, it's one of the big things that kept me interested in comics, was seeing different artist styles. So it's a chance to pay homage to some of those things too. Yeah. And somebody had mentioned like the grand design, you know, in the title. I think originally it spoke to like Chris Claremont's grand design for the X-Men, you know, like almost how it's like one giant story. But in my mind, it's like, well, put some more of the design part in there, you know, the graphic design, add some of that stuff. And when I see these different art styles, like that's a big part of it, is Hulk has such a graphic presence. And it's kind of cool over the decades to see how he evolved and how different artists would interpret that.
Yeah, and even just even writers too. I mean, like if you look at, you can look at most heroes are relatively the same, and if you look at their different designs, they just got new costumes. You know, you can look at Spider-Man's different costume of the years, or Batman's, or various changes. Usually not drastic changes, but little ones here and there. But the Hulk, like you have the first Hulk that like basically turned into the Hulk at nighttime. You know, like when he first started, it was mostly just the sun, right? That when it came up, he would turn back. And then it kind of, they went harder into the rage part of it where they leaned. So then it was like the rage monster. Then he was the Hulk all the time. Then it was sometimes. Then he was Smart Hulk. Then he was. Then you had Mr. Fix-It. Then you had the Maestro. You had like all these cool versions. So even just looking at the design of him, but then over the years, the various versions of him you get, it's such a broad spectrum of stuff that you can kind of play with. Red Hulk and good
visuals, you know.
Yeah, gorgeous.
Different versions, they would look very different. So
yeah, like Mr. Fix-It in like a pinstripe gangster outfit, you know, versus like dude over here, you know, fighting Wolverine and Madripoor. Like all that stuff is just amazing.
Yes.
Yeah, it's so cool. Cool. So yeah, I guess we're pretty cut up, but I just wanted to ask you about Comics Kayfabe. So this is something that you're very well known for, I think, within comic circles, because it's a very popular podcast.
Yeah. I started it with Ed Piskor, who, you know, I mentioned a couple times for his Hip Hop Family Tree and X-Men Grand Design. We're both around the Pittsburgh area. So we've been traveling to comic book shows for almost 20 years, you know, giving each other feedback on our work, stuff like that, a long friendship. And in 2018, Ed was like, we should do a YouTube, because we would always say like, we should record these car rides to and from, you know, Charlotte, the Heroes Con, places like that. And I would joke like, that's my master's class in comics make, like that's where I really learned about how to make comics. And so, you know, we had been talking about it, and once we started seeing like YouTube and kind of getting ideas on how you could do a comic show on YouTube, that's how Cartoonist Kayfabe came about. And you know, we talk to pros, we show demos, sometimes we talk about old comics, and it's just comics, you know, like we both love comics. The other piece is there's so much negative takes on comics or on anything really online. And I thought, like, I just love comics. So, like, let's do an alternative and just show off stuff we love and talk about what gets us excited about comics. And I think that tone has really connected with audiences. You know, we've gotten a lot of positive feedback based on that. But yeah, it's been fun. It's a chance to just celebrate comics and really spend time each week hanging out with another cartoonist and a fellow comics fan and just talking shop and sharing books with each other and, you know, trying to get each other to kind of pop. You know, you pull out some cool artist that I haven't seen, I get excited, and vice versa.
Awesome.
And it's led to some really great stuff. You know, I mentioned talking to other pros, like we've had people come on and go through comics with us. We had Dave Gibbons come on and spend 2 hours going through page by page Watchmen number 12 for New Year's.
Oh my God.
So it was like,
oh my God. You know, I remember reading, I got his artist edition for the Watchmen comic. And like, I remember reading the beginning about how he lost a lot of the pages early on, or they got sold for cheap or not the value they should have been sold for. And I was so sad, you know, but you look through the beautiful book, like the sprawling pages of all the devastation in New York, and it's amazing work. That would have been so surreal. Wow.
Yeah, he's you know, and I can tell you lots of those stories, like just having the chance to talk to other pros and hear about their experience, especially like a lot of these guys have been around for decades, like what they've done in comics and what they can talk about from technique to actually like comics history that they were there for. It's I always say, like, I'm the first kayfaber. We hang up with these guys, or we find some new comic or new artist to get excited about, and it's like I'm the first one in line who's feeling that. So it's pretty cool.
I love that you even seem to inject a little bit of wrestling terminology into your podcast title with kayfabe.
Well, we are inspired by a lot of wrestling, so that's where the kayfabe comes from, and part of my wrestling fandom comes from all the podcasts. So like hearing old wrestlers talk about their experiences and tell these stories and road stories. It's hard not to get excited by that. Like, I'm such a fan of genre, and in a weird way, wrestling, it has those qualities where it has its own language and, kind of its own operating system and rules, unwritten rules. So, I got pretty sucked into the storytelling part. I started out, I would hear Steve Austin's podcast, and he would talk about telling a story in the match, in the ring. And in my mind, it's like, I do a lot of superhero action comics, a lot of fight comics. So like, how does that work? Like the storytelling within the fight, what's he talking about? And that was what really started me down, like listening to wrestling podcasts with the idea of how do I apply that to like a fight in a comic?
That's very interesting.
To bring up the levels, same thing, like narrative stuff, like to basically build a 3-act structure in a fight. And that's where it started. And now it's just like, I don't know, there's such great history in wrestling. Like I'm just
wrestling is incredibly interesting, especially even if someone who's not, like, obviously I've been doing it for 16 years now, but even just as outsiders, watching like the shows like Dark Side of the Ring and some of those shows that have come out that sort of peel back the curtain a little and show you some of like how insane life on the road is, or just in general for some of these people. But you're right. I've never really thought about the juxtaposition. Like I always say that wrestling to me is kind of real life comics. You have, your powers, which are your move set. You have your costumes, your crazy characters and all that sort of stuff. That's sort of what drew me to it as a young person. And when I got into it later. But yeah, I never thought about using it the other way, like trying to look at the match structure and how you're telling a story through a 15 to 20 minute match, and then applying that towards doing action sequences in comics. It's very interesting. And I think that there is something there. I think you could actually learn quite a bit from that. So that's very cool. That's that's very nice.
So yeah, we borrow some terminology because
it's
so much fun.
You don't need my approval, but you have it anyway. Use it away. It's not even a term that's used as much in wrestling, because the days of pretending it's all strictly real, I'm really an Iranian who hates that guy over there who's an American. It's funny. I was on a tour one time with Jim Duggan, and he was telling me the story about, like, in a long car ride, about when he and the Iron Sheik got caught in a car together. And that was like one of the first big moments where the world was like, wait a minute, these two are feuding. What are they driving in a car together? Like they got arrested for, I think the Sheik had weed on him or something.
That's right.
And it was like how huge that was. And like he was so worried about his career and how it could have doomed everything. And it kind of started the path that led towards admitting that wrestling is, these people.
It certainly hurt, I think, Jim Duggan's career. That really, it
more
cost
than the
chance to maybe win a championship in WWF.
Yeah, it really. But Jim's a really salt of the earth kind of guy. Really cool. I wrestled him a couple times.
Oh, that's awesome.
This would be a while ago now, but yeah, he's very nice, very cool guy. So what's next for you? What projects you got coming up? Is it just grand design, or is there anything beyond that?
Grand designs as far as I can go. I've been. I end up doing a lot of freelance work, and things I have gotten busier. Whether it's cartoonist kayfabe or the Hulk or who knows what. But my to-do list had gotten out of control, so I'm trying to get it back to zero. And it's never really been at zero since probably, 1999. And I'm trying to get things done before I take on more work. So I owe some people covers and things of that nature. Okay. But I don't know what the next big project will be.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to it. I'm very much looking forward to the Hulk book as well. So that's
me too.
I'm not waiting for Christmas, so that's coming home the second it comes out. So awesome. Well, thanks so much for being on the show. It was great talking to you, Jim.
Great talking to you. This is awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you. And if you're ever back this way, look me up.
Sounds good.
All right. Have a good night.
You too.
And there was my conversation with Jim Rugg. What a great talk. Didn't you enjoy that? I really enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoyed as much listening to it as I did having it. Jim's super intelligent guy, real reverence for the source material, and a really interesting and cool graphic artist, not just in the regular comic sense, but in the way he plays with the medium and explores all these different ways of telling a story and all these new and interesting styles. And I think that's really on display with Afrodisiac. It's super on display with Grand Design. And do yourself a favor and pick up the Treasury Edition when it comes out. I know I will be, and I'm very, very excited for it. So I don't want to wish away time, because God knows the older you get, the more precious it seems. But I'm looking forward to the release of that, so I can get my hands, my grubby little hands, on that really cool edition. And be sure to tune in to his podcast as well, Comics Kayfabe, with Ed Piskert. Anyway, just a reminder to check out our sister podcast. I say that because I'm a co-host on that podcast as well. The X-Rated, the X-Men Animated Review Show. There's links to it on the website, graphichistories.com, in which you can find the links to get to the show, but it's on all your podcast mediums, your cast boxes, your all those sort of things, your Stitchers, your Apples. It's on all of them. So make sure to check that out, in which me and Davin Scalehorn watch and review every episode of the original X-Men animated TV show from the 90s. And it's a lot of fun. I'm really enjoying it. Rewatching, in some cases rewatching, most times experiencing these for the first time, a lot of these classic episodes of this cartoon. And we have many guests on the show. Just recently we had Rick Hoberg on the show. We had the Leewalds on the show. We had Lenore Zan on the show, did the voice of Rogue. Very cool episode with her as well. But yeah, check it out. It's a great show, and it's a lot of fun. If you like nostalgia podcasts, if you have reverence for the X-Men, as some of you and many of you probably do, check it out. I'm on vacation right now, assuming I'm not with the crab people. So I will be back in a fortnight's time with another episode. I don't know who the guest is yet. I may have recorded already, but this is the future, so who knows? But I will announce that on social media, as I often do. But in the meantime, I hope you're having a wonderful summer. Thank you very much for tuning in. Please like and subscribe if you don't already. And tell a friend. Just tell a friend about the show. If they like fun podcasts in which cool, interesting, comic-related people get interviewed, this is it. This is your place. This is your home. But and I look forward to having them join the fold. But thank you very much for tuning in. My name is André Myatt, and I'll catch you in a fortnight. Stay safe.